Hello and welcome to this special My COVID Story interview as part of our Aerotime week dedicated to pilots. My name is Victoria Bryan and I am delighted to be here to interview a number of captains and first officers during this week when we'll be marking International Pilots Day. We'll be bringing you some special reports and interviews from across the world as we take a deeper look into the role of pilots in our world today and hear the stories of some of our colleagues. Today we have the opportunity to speak to Hunter McLeod, who is a pilot with Pays Aviation in Australia. We'll be hearing all about Hunter's turbulent flight through the pandemic as she shares her COVID story with us. Hunter started her aviation journey as cabin crew with Qantas Australia. She knew she wanted to be a pilot and worked towards her goal and made it into the cockpit with Wrights Air in 2017. Since then, she has worked in Australia and the United States for United Express. Before she started her aviation career, Hunter worked as a radio presenter at Nova Entertainment, so these kind of interviews will be very familiar to her. During the COVID period, Hunter sadly lost a pilot job in the USA, moved back to Australia, had to spend time in an isolation hotel, returned to live with her mother, looked for a new job, found a new job, and is now flying again. It's a rollercoaster tale, and I am delighted to welcome Hunter to Aerotime to share her COVID story today. Let's go right back to the beginning and take you back to the time when you realised you wanted to be a pilot. Can you talk us about that time in your life?
Absolutely. It came into my life a little bit later than most people. I was working as a radio announcer and I was traveling the world conducting interviews. And on a particular trip, I was heading to New York to interview Beyonce, and I had the most amazing time sitting in a Qantas aircraft, and everyone was so great. And I just loved my travel experience. And I thought, you know what? This would be the best job ever. If I could travel for a living and get to stay in fun hotels and meet wonderful people, this is what I should be doing. So I started looking for a cabin crew job and managed to get one at Qantas. And from there, it was very quick to realize I was probably in the wrong end of the aircraft and I would like to be up the front.
And how was the journey from the back of the aircraft to the front of the aircraft then? Were people surprised that you wanted to do that? What help was available to you?
I think there was a few people doing a very similar journey, and the further along this I have gotten, the more people I've spoken to that did the exact same path. They thought, I like this aviation business. Maybe it's for me. I'm going to put my toes in the water and just see how I feel. And then once you've put a foot in, either as cabin crew or as a baggage handler or something like that, you realize the support in this industry is just phenomenal. And you can ask anyone any questions. You know, the captains and the first officers would hear that I was doing my very first pilot exam and they go, well, just come up and we'll talk you through everything. And, you know, you can ask all the questions you want to ask, and everyone's just fabulous. So there was heaps of support and heaps of encouragement the whole way through.
Great. And tell us, so you made it to the front of the aircraft. And so tell us about the role that you had when the pandemic struck. So this was you'd gone through a couple of jobs, I understand, and you were living in the USA at the time. So
yeah, I got my dream job. I always wanted to move to America, and it just all seemed to line up perfectly. I had the perfect amount of hours at the exact time the USA was just sucking up pilots as quickly as they could. I managed to get a job quite quickly, quite easily. The visa process was 6 weeks, and I was in America working for a company called ExpressJet Airlines, which is now no longer with us. We were flying for United Express at the time. So we did the Embraer flights, the regional flights out of Chicago, which is where I was based. And I had a wonderful apartment and I was living with my partner and everything was wonderful. And then, about February, the terminals went very quiet. And by March, my roster was looking pretty empty. And then it was really starting to sink in that something's seriously happening, and people got really nervous, and there was whispers starting between the pilot group within another month or so that this could be the end of us. We could start to see this wasn't going to be a quick fix.
So when you started realizing back in March 2020 that something was amiss, something was awry, did you immediately start sort of thinking about a plan B and what you could potentially do? I mean, you'd moved to the States, you had the visa as well. I mean, this must have been added complications for you as well as an Australian.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I left Australia thinking I was probably never going back. I sold up everything. I got rid of the car. I went over with 2 suitcase bags and that was it. And I started again in Chicago thinking that was life now. So the nervous really kicked in probably June, July when, you know, the quick, oh, it's going to need to be a couple of weeks, we'll get back to work, that just started to really fade off. And then they were starting to talk about the company actually going under. And I had to start going, okay, how does this look for me? I know we have the CARES package for a little while, so that kept the company afloat and we kept getting a wage for a while. And then they told us, you know, probably October 1 at the end of the CARES, it's not looking good. I didn't know what to do. I was also quite scared at that point. You know, at Chicago at that time, we had the Black Lives Matter protests happening. There was a lot of rioting. There was a lot of looting. Things were getting set on fire a couple of times a week. It was a very scary, stressful time. And I was unsettled, unsure, nervous, didn't know what to do, didn't know where to turn. I knew I couldn't stay in America. So as soon as the job was done, I got on the first flight back home. I know a few people stayed around and tried to find something else, but no one's been successful yet. So I'm glad I made the move back home.
I mean, worldwide travel was in absolute disarray at that time. So how easy was it for you to actually get on a flight and get back to Australia? I mean, it's no easy journey.
Oh, I've heard some horror stories. I know people were paying $8,000-9,000 for a ticket back to Australia, a one-way ticket, and then needing to quarantine and spending another $3,000 a head just to quarantine in Australia for 2 weeks. So it was a nightmare. I was just lucky enough that I was flying under the United brand and we got staff travel. So I just went to the airport and sat there until I got a seat, and I was just lucky enough that I could get on the very first flight that I sat for. So I got on the plane and I don't know, I was crying. I was emotional. I was emotional that I was leaving, but I was also emotional that I could get a flight. I know there was people that couldn't get on, and yeah, crazy, horrible time.
What are you thinking at that stage? I mean, you said that you left Australia with the intention of never going back. When you left the States, did you have a similar sort of feeling in your mind that that was it, that you were leaving the States and you wouldn't be back?
At the time, no. At the time, I still thought, given another couple of months, everything will get back to normal and I'll go back. So no, I mean, if the pandemic has taught me anything, it's that I can't plan a single thing, because as soon as I make a plan, it is going to just change at the drop of a hat. So when I left, I mean, I'm open to going back. I definitely am. But I think, yeah, at that point when I left, I thought at some stage I'd go back.
So when you left at that stage, were you still thinking then about how you were going to get back into the flight deck, whether that was in the States, or maybe were you already thinking, right, I'm probably going to have to get back into the flight deck, maybe in Australia, somewhere closer to home?
I was very nervous. I knew there was pretty much no industry at that point in time in Australia. We really shut down. We didn't just close our international borders, we also closed our domestic borders, in terms of we couldn't for a long point in time just cross the state border. They really shut us down. So we were hurting. We knew there was no domestic flying, no international flying. General aviation was suffering because all the people that normally would have upgraded to airlines are now sitting in that bush job that they've had for a couple of years. They don't want to give up any time at all. So I knew there was going to be a really long period where I was probably going to be out of work and having to just get a job at the supermarket or anything I could find just to get by.
Okay, so when you got back to Australia, what happened? You went into the hotel quarantine, which I'm sure was a delightful period in your life. And then so yeah, hotel quarantine, and then what did you do? I mean, you presumably started planning when you were in the hotel as well.
Well, this was not the best period in my life, as you can imagine. I spent a long time on the ground in Chicago. So, you know, when pilots aren't flying, they're not making money. We don't make money sitting on the ground. So there was a lot of time where I was just chipping into savings, and I came back with pretty much nothing. There wasn't much left. So I came back to Australia, landed in Sydney. We all got bussed to hotel quarantine, very strict army guard. We were all checked in, we were all closed behind the doors, and there was no windows and no, moving around or anything for 2 weeks. I just kind of sat there and stared out the window. I was lucky enough to have a view of Sydney Harbour Bridge for those 2 weeks. So, if you're going to have a view, that was a pretty good view. But finally got released from jail / quarantine, and I had nothing. I had no money. I had nowhere to live. I didn't have a car. I didn't have anything. So I ended up buying a tent and sleeping in my mother's backyard for the next 3 months until I could start to mentally pull myself back together and be able to find a job and start to, be able to afford a car and things like that. So, I slept in a tent for a long time.
Oh my goodness. I suppose it's lucky that the weather is halfway decent in Australia, at least.
It was glorious. So that was on my side.
And so then, so you're in your tent. What was the job search like? It must have been quite hard to motivate yourself to go out from having come back, and it must have been quite hard to pick yourself back up. So how did you do that, and how did you find the start of the job hunt?
Well, there was no aviation jobs. That was a wipeout. So I knew I had to find something completely separate. I tried to think about what else I would be able to do or want to do, and the only thing I could come up with was operating machinery. So I started applying to the mines to work as a truck driver and bus driving and those sorts of things. And, the market was just brutal. There was thousands of people applying for one job. It took a really long time. I would have sent out 200 resumes, didn't hear a thing. And these were for all sorts of jobs, bar jobs, when the bars started to reopen, and I couldn't get anything. I actually ended up working as a nanny for a friend of mine who had a couple of children and couldn't find an au pair. So I just worked with her and lived with her for a little bit until I managed to pick up this new role.
So how did you manage to get this new role at Pays? How did you see it? It must have been quite tough competition as well, and it must have been amazing to actually see an aviation job.
Well, I actually didn't. I had a call from a friend of mine, a guy I used to instruct years ago, and he just called out of the blue and said, "I see you back, and what are you up to?" And I said, "Well, I'm looking after 2 small children at the moment. Have you got anything?" And he goes, "Oh, I might have some work for you." He does a lot of work with the firebombing and that sort of part of aviation. And he said, "Well, we might have a job coming up." And he didn't. He couldn't help me out. But he said, "Look, I've sent your resume to a friend of mine, and that's now my current boss." So he got a text from me saying, "Oh, here, you've got my resume, and I'm going to come down and meet you." And I drove 9 hours from my house to this current company and just knocked on the door, and I spoke to the fabulous Ross, my new boss, and after about an hour he told me to come back tomorrow and sign the papers. So I'm very lucky and thankful and bewildered almost that I could find a job at this point in time.
That's absolutely amazing. It's really good to hear. So what kind of flying are you doing for Pays? What does a typical day look like for you now?
Sure. It's mostly an ag company. So I've come on board. I've got mostly a charter background prior to airline work. So I'm going to do the winter season, which is starting from about a month away here. We do a lot of outback tours. That's what we're planning. So out to Uluru and into the middle of Australia and up to the Northern Territory and those remote places that most people would never, ever go and see. So the plan is now, with no one able to travel overseas for the next year or two, we need to take people on holidays. People still want to go and explore and have fun and have a good time. So my day is planning those and getting those ready, and then flying those. We're doing those a few times a month. So we're just using a Caravan, so 14-seater, and taking small tours to the outback.
That sounds pretty awesome. You must be hopeful as well. The Transtasman bubble's just started, so that's presumably giving a bit of hope to you guys over there down under as well.
I'm just so nervous. I really am. Unfortunately, we're just making snap decisions, and one day everything's rosy, and then the next day or by midnight they've closed a border. We'll close the border for one or two cases. So people are scared to travel. That's still making me nervous. As much as I would hope and love that to be the start of the open up, I'm not sure.
So when do you think that things will be back to normal in Australia and in aviation around the world generally?
I think internationally it's going to take a really, really long time. I know Qantas is planning on all their pilots coming back on around 2024, which is a long way away, and it seems really crazy far, but it's seeming almost realistic for us. I know that Australia won't want to let anyone through the international border until everyone is vaccinated, and that is going to take years. I think 2022 we'll probably see a few things happening. 2023 I'm thinking we'll be back to normal. That's still a couple of years away, but it seems realistic.
Yeah, so what's your I mean, we know as pilots we always have to have a plan B and a plan C, and what's your thinking at the moment? Would you like to go back to the USA, or is Australia your home now and this is where you see yourself for the next few years?
No, I live out of a bag, so my home can be anywhere. I'm really, really happy at Pays. Pays is such a great company and a great opportunity, and I think it's going to be so much fun flying here for the next little while. So I'm very happy and settled here. And in a few years, I guess, who knows? We'll wait and see how it all plays out. I maybe eventually would like to end up in Asia. That's always been a bit of a goal as well. So maybe in the future I can work towards that.
Great. So, I mean, you've had a really challenging time, but you've come through it, which is fantastic. Many of our pilot colleagues across the world are still finding things very difficult. Do you have a message for other pilots who are facing these huge obstacles in their lives right now due to the pandemic?
You know, the only thing I could do to stay sane and to stay in a good headspace was to keep exercising. I know that sounds silly and the most simplistic cure, but the more I exercise, the more I walk, the more I do yoga, the better I am mentally, and the more I'm willing to keep going and keep pushing for aviation. I know a lot of people are happy to move on to other things, but I don't want a plan B. This is the only thing I want to do with my whole life. So I just have to keep in a good headspace, and exercise helps for me.
Great, thank you very much, Hunter. That's it for all my questions for now. So Hunter, thank you for joining Aerotime today and for sharing your story. We described it as a turbulent flight and as a roller coaster, and I think it certainly was, having spoken to you. Really hope that your story and how you've sprung back from this will help others who are facing similar challenges to know that there is light at the end of this pandemic tunnel, and that there is a future out there and there are opportunities for us all. Hopefully loads of people find your story inspiring. I did. I'm desperate to keep on flying. So, and there's absolutely no doubt that you'll be a role model for so many. Really enjoy speaking to you today. I know that the Aerotime community will also really enjoy hearing your story. So thank you for sharing my COVID story. If anybody else would like to share your My COVID story of Aerotime, please do get in touch and we will share it with the world. That brings us to the end of this Aerotime My COVID story interview. But please stay tuned for more exclusive content throughout this special week celebrating the life and work of pilots across the world. My name is Victoria Bryan and you've been watching Aerotime. Goodbye.